So when working with a client to set up a system that their staff and their organization actually uses, there's sort of three main challenges that I come across very commonly. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about those three challenges and how we address them, because ultimately the system is only as important as the people who use it. And if people don't use it, it's useless. So the first challenge that we come across is friction. And so friction is essentially, how easy is it to get your staff or your team to actually use the system? So very commonly, I see people put in a new system, but maybe there's a layer of complexity that kind of requires additional training. And then you have some people who are more competent than others. And so you end up with a situation where the people who are competent use the system really well. The people who maybe aren't as proficient with the system, they don't use it as much, or they use it sparingly. And so it actually reduces the effectiveness of the system for the people who are using it properly. And you end up with this cycle where the system you just spent a bunch of time, energy, and money putting in doesn't work for anybody. And so you just end up with a situation where there's too much friction to get people to use the system, that the system is effectively useless. The second one is setup. So most organizations who have been around for at least a couple of years, they have a sort of a set of tools that they already use. So whether that's QuickBooks or Sage Accounting or the Microsoft 365 suite or Airtable or Notion or any combination of the above, they have a series of tools that do a specific set of things. And so changing out of those tools is like turning a ship, right? Getting the information out and then training your staff on how to use a new tool and doing all that just is way too expensive and time intensive to actually be effective. And so you end up in a situation where you don't want to bother setting it up, or you just scrap everything that you already have and build a new system. But the problem is now you have to train everyone on how to use a new system, and there's a bunch of kinks you need to work out. So the goal with setup is to sort of minimize the impact and the friction on taking what you already have, the tools you already have, making them actually work together to accomplish and solve the problems that you are having. And the third one is, once you have the staff on board and you have the setup done, so everything is working and people are actually using it, how do you maintain it, right? Because if you end up in a situation where you have this great system, you come across sort of an edge case or something that doesn't happen very commonly, and the system's like, I don't know what to do here. And people are like, I've never seen this before. And basically it ends up with causing more of a headache than it did solving the problem, because you have to go back and try and fix the problem the system caused because it didn't know how to deal with this sort of anomaly. Then you just end up in a situation where you're like, well, let's go back to pen and paper because at least that was easy to use. So the maintenance component is really important. So long term, that's going to be what ensures the success of this new system. It makes your business more efficient, saves you money and time in the long run. So in this video, I'm going to address those three challenges specifically and kind of provide you an insight into sort of how we tackle those three problems. So the first challenge that we come across very commonly, and this is probably the most common one, is friction. And so friction to me is defined as the ability to get your staff to use the tool or the system that you put in place. So basically, how difficult is it for you to get people to do what you need them to do in the context of a system or an organizational tool? And so our goal is to always reduce the amount of friction. So the best way that we can reduce friction, and I'll paint this kind of picture with an example. So if you have, let's say you have your organizational kind of daily or weekly or monthly operational system. So on a day, you have kind of like a river, and each river represents a task that needs to happen from start to finish. Now, you get some rivers are really bendy and require a lot of complexity, and you have some rivers that are maybe less so, and they kind of flow a little bit nicer. So our goal, as when we put in a system, especially a system that people actually use, is we say, okay, cool, you have your staff, they're doing tasks already, they've been doing the tasks this way for a long time, and they come across an inefficiency or a problem. So we call it like a bend in the river. And so this might be one of the most common ones, is information transfer. So you have a staff member who's been dealing with a project or a task, and they've primarily been responsible for that. They end up in a situation where that person is sick, or that person is away, or otherwise unable to provide the information that the rest of the team needs. So your team gets to this place and they go, I don't have that piece of information. There's a question that needs to be answered. So you don't want to guess, because you end up in a situation where your client may be expecting something, and if the information is not correct, then your team will have to undo the mistake that was made because they didn't have the right information. And you end up in a situation where it just costs you time, money, and also client satisfaction. So if there's something blocking your river, you can't move forward, and you end up in a situation where you have to move on to something else until you can solve that problem. So what we like to do is we essentially take what your staff is already doing. So that's the goal, not giving your staff a new set of tasks or procedures to follow that they're not familiar with. It's taking what they already do and basically building a bridge across all of the bends in your river. And so what that does is essentially removes all of these inefficiencies and allows them to go from point A to point Z without getting roadblocked, at least not roadblocked on the regular basis. There's always going to be things that come up that may cause problems, and their system will hopefully solve those problems. But you end up in a situation where your task can do 80% of the things they need to do without getting hiccups at all because you have the right system in place to solve that. So an example that I'll use is actually a system that we put in for a client not too long ago. And basically their kind of core crux of their problem was they had a salesperson and a project manager. And so the salesperson would be dealing with the client on kind of selling and building the project. And that could take years, right? There's a 2-year sales cycle and there's a ton of correspondence, a ton of email, back and forth, kind of ironing out the details with a bunch of different stakeholders. And so all of this is in the salesperson's mailbox and also in the salesperson's head. The project manager, as far as they're concerned, until the project is actually done, they don't know anything about the project. They just know that the salesperson is working on something, but they don't know what it is. They don't know who it's for. That's it. So when the salesperson finally sells the project and the project is a go and the contract is signed, the information now needs to be transferred to the project manager. Sounds easy, but the problem is the salesperson would go, hey, I have 7 projects on the go that I'm trying to sell. This one's done. Here's the contract. I need to go move on to these other ones. And the project manager goes, okay, well, what are the specifics of what needs to be done? The salesperson's like, I can tell you that, but we can set up a meeting a week or 2 weeks from now and go through that process. And the project manager's like, well, I could have people starting this project today or tomorrow, and we're just waiting for the start. And it costs everybody time, costs everybody money. And so it also requires this salesperson to stop what they're doing, which is selling and conveying information to the project manager in order for the project manager to do their job. The project manager is frustrated because they can't start the project. The salesperson's like, yeah, I'll get to it when I get to it. You could use discipline or other procedures to get that information transferred, but why not build a bridge that essentially takes what the salesperson is already doing and allows that information to just flow to the project manager really easily. So an example that we used is basically what we called the project intake. So the project intake is a 3-field form. That's right, 3 fields. So it's a project name, the client that the project was for, and when the project needed to start. That was it. So the salesperson or the project manager just needed to know those 3 bits of information, which the salesperson could tell them over coffee or in a text message. Then what the project manager would do is fill out that form, just on their device or on their computer. And meanwhile, in the background, the salesperson, as we said, already had all this correspondence with the client. All those emails were sorted into a folder on their mail server for that specific client. And so what their system did is once the project manager filled out this 3-field form, take them 30 seconds, the system would then submit. It would then create a project record they use SharePoint. So create a project record in SharePoint to be like, hey, this project has now been assigned to this client and this person is the project manager. And then what it would do is it would go back to the salesperson's mailbox and look at all of the correspondence that salesperson had, extract it, summarize it, pull out the key kind of most important points, and then feed it back into the project record. And this would be done using like AI or an AI agent, and basically feed all that information into the project record. Then from that point on, the project would then have a Teams channel created. It would then have a project manager assigned if it wasn't the project manager who created the project. It would then have a series of tasks assigned and delegated to the relevant people involved in the project. And then it would have a summary sent to the project manager of what the project was, what needed to be done, when it's being started, and et cetera, everything that was pulled from the salesperson's email. So the salesperson didn't have to do anything else except for put their emails into a folder. And then the project manager didn't have to do anything else except for fill out this 30-second intake form, if that. So now the salesperson's happy because their time is not even really being infringed upon at all. And the project manager is happy because they managed to extract all that information without having to talk to the salesperson really at all. That system created a lot less friction because nobody had to do anything different. So your bridge is now here to here, and all this stuff in a daily basis, which may not seem big on its own, but when you compound that over hundreds of tasks, over hundreds of days and hours, the amount of time and money that's spent solving these problems that don't need to be solved is now completely gone. So you have all that time back, and you're in a situation where everybody is just doing what they're already doing, but the system in your organization is running in the background to solve all those problems. The second challenge that we come across is setup. So setup is basically the time and energy required to actually put the system in place. So there's sort of two approaches to this. The first one I've seen is incredibly common and also one of the problems that we tend to try and solve. So let's say you have option A. Option A is you have a collection of tools. So you have QuickBooks and you have Microsoft 365, so Word and Excel, and then you have a job management software or a tool like Jira, Airtable, whatever it is. So you have a collection of tools and software that your system currently runs on. So as a manager or business owner, you have some pain points that you've been trying to deal with. So you look at your current software suite and you go, none of it's working. It's not doing what I need it to do. Oh, but I found, or somebody recommended this new fancy software that does all that stuff. And it's, X amount of thousands of dollars a year. It's going to solve all those problems. Let's do that. So they basically, so I'm drawing my little dollar sign. They basically go, let's scrap all of this, migrate everything over. And now we have this new fancy software that can do all that stuff. And that sounds great on paper. Problem is, you have to get all this data out of this stuff that you've been using for the last however many years into a system that you probably have never used before. You may be comfortable with it, but your staff needs to be trained on it. And there's going to be days, weeks, even months where they're still learning this. Mistakes are going to happen. There's certain aspects of your business that are going to slow down or grind to a halt because you're trying to get the system migrated over. And you're in a situation where, okay, cool, this may have promised you the world, but if people aren't on board because you haven't solved friction, then the system is effectively useless. So you just dumped a bunch of money into a system that actually doesn't solve any of your problems. A year, 2 years from now, you're going to be back to this step, trying to figure out why this new system you spent a bunch of money on isn't actually solving any of the problems that these tools didn't solve either. Option 2, which is the one that we tend to go for, is you have all of your tools in your current toolbox, but they're kind of like this. So let's just say you just dumped a bunch of tools, all of your software suite is just kind of messy lying around in your toolbox. So QuickBooks does your invoicing, but you have maybe Toggle or Track doing your timesheets, but you probably have QuickBooks doing timesheets as well. And then you have Airtable, which kind of has some of your projects listed, but then you have people sending emails back and forth and don't put the information in Airtable. And then people are sending emails and then they're also talking on Slack. And now your project manager who's trying to find information through multiple places. It takes them 10 minutes to answer a specific question. It's a mess. You have this toolbox that of all these tools individually, they are great at solving their specific problem, but used together, they don't really accomplish anything and actually kind of create more headache than they're worth. And so that's where the friction comes in because people are like, I've got so many logins, I've got so many accounts, and I can't find the piece of information. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call my boss, or I'm going to call my team lead, or I'm going to call the business owner, and you're trying to get stuff done. And you just answer, all you're doing is putting out fires every single day, all day. And it's exhausting because you're not actually doing the things that actually move you forward and make you money. So what we tend to do is we take that toolbox that you've got completely disorganized. The first thing that we do is we organize it. So we just take all of your tools and we put them into neat little kind of sections. So we say, what is this tool the best at and what is it trying to solve? Okay, so you have QuickBooks. QuickBooks is for invoicing and for bookkeeping. So let's just relegate it to that. It does integrate with other tools like QuickBooks Time and, so on and so forth, all the other Intuit suite. But you may have another tool like Toggle or Clockify that does that too. So you may not like the interface of how QuickBooks does X, but you like how the interface of this other tool does it. So let's use that for time tracking and use that for time tracking only. And then the same thing goes for document creation or for project management, right? So all these different tools do things well. So how do we make them do the thing they need to do in your specific context? So once we've figured that out, we can also identify what's missing. So what problems are your existing tools not solving? Because you never knew because your toolbox was a mess. But now you know, and now you know what needs to be solved. So we can go, okay, there's a couple things we can do. You can either use one of the existing tools that actually might solve this problem. You just never used it that way before. Alternatively, you go, there's another tool that we can use. Let's see if let's put that in that slot. And now we have a whole suite of tools that are solving the problem we need to solve. So once that's done, great. So there's still an underlying issue. And that is the third step, which is we actually connect everything together. So when you submit a timesheet, your bookkeeper or your administrator already knows what billable time needs to go to that job. And that timesheet log gets added to the project record in SharePoint or Airtable. And then all the emails or correspondence on that project also gets stored in the project record. And then we also know the status of the project. So appropriate emails can be sent out either manually or automatically to the client for updates and follow-ups. The team knows what the next step in the milestones are, and so on and so forth. You can see how just by doing that, we've essentially created a system where I know from step A to Z what needs to be done just by organizing your toolbox. So instead, and it kind of eliminates, I hate to say it, but it eliminates the personal touch. Whereas I don't need to call someone and interrupt them to find out information, because I can just look at the system, which is properly architected from the start, and it's all connected and all works. And we've reduced the friction. So now people don't have to do anything differently than what they were already doing. All they have to do is just use the tools they've been using, and the information is now flowing down your river, accomplishing your tasks for you, and everybody can find what they need to, and there's no roadblocks, or at least minimal roadblocks. So that is the setup. So we basically take your messy, disorganized toolbox, and instead of scrapping the whole thing and putting in a new system that you have to learn and spend money on, we just take what you're already doing and we just make it better. So that way you can actually solve the problems that you've been trying to solve and move your business forward and make you money and save you time. So the third most common challenge that I come across when building a system that people actually want to use is the concept of maintenance. Now, maintenance is really important because it ensures the long-term success of your system. So in your business, if you put in a system and you've solved the friction problem, so people now actually use it and they use it well and they use it the way that's intended, and then you've solved the setup problem in a sense that everything is connected and working the way it's supposed to, you need to make sure that it stays that way, because as soon as the system derails, the whole thing collapses and you're back to basically wishing you were using pen and paper, because that's how you just understood how that worked. So we want to avoid that. So maintenance is really important. So let's go back to our first step. If you imagine your tasks or your sort of daily or weekly operations of your business, whatever the business is a series of a river, right? So the end of your river is basically the task that you want to accomplish or the goal you're looking to get to. And the start of the river is basically the entry point into the task. So you've received a task and now you need to complete a series of steps in order to accomplish it. And so reducing the friction basically means that instead of diverting the river to go completely separately and changing how everybody does everything, you just build a bridge across all of the inefficiencies and all the bends that prevent you or slow you down from getting to the end point. You build a bridge to cross them all. So now nobody has to do anything particularly differently, but they can still get to the end goal much faster and then move on to the next task and so on and so forth, and just make everybody more efficient. So that's reducing friction, is basically aligning the new system with what people are already doing to prevent the inevitable, oh, this is too complicated, or I don't know how it works, and so on and so forth. And then step 2 is basically you've taken all of your tools that you currently use, all of your software, everything that you currently use, it all works together and is connected. So they all talk to each other and basically are continuing to move information and the task down through the flow instead of essentially creating more complexity because nobody knows where to find bits of information. So that's step 2. And then step 3 is maintaining that to ensure that that bridge doesn't break. Because what happens is inevitably you'll end up in a situation where, if I just crudely do this, where the river might change. And now you have basically this new problem that you've never seen before emerge. And the system wasn't built originally to solve that problem. So our goal is to make sure that this system, A, has enough support and infrastructure to support the bridge so it doesn't completely collapse, but also that it can evolve over time, because your organization is not going to be the same organization a year from now, and it's definitely not going to be the same organization 5 years from now. You're going to do things a little bit differently. There's going to be new ways of doing things, and so you need the system to evolve with you. And so the best way to accomplish this problem is through an SOP. Now, an SOP is a standard operating procedure, And for anyone who doesn't know, it's a set of standard instructions on how to solve a particular problem or accomplish a particular task. So this SOP could be applied to any business. It really doesn't matter. It's sort of a universal term that's important to have. If you don't have an SOP, there is a link in our description that talks about the importance of SOP and also provides a template on how to build your own SOP or start building your own SOPs for your own business. But basically, the SOP is important because it essentially provides a set of instructions to anybody who looks at this problem and needs to know how to solve it, even if they've never solved it before. But the biggest problem with an SOP is how do you actually get it? Because you may have started this business by yourself and now you've hired some employees and they all have their own nuances and ways of doing things. And there's no really standard procedure. It's just kind of like, I'll just get it done in any way, shape or form. And that's great. I mean, that works for the most part, but you could end up in a situation where maybe it doesn't work. And then you as the business owner or the manager is frequently having to micromanage because people are not doing things the way they need to be done because they were actually never taught how to do it in a standard way. The SOP is basically there to solve that problem, but an SOP needs to be created. And so someone needs to actually write the SOP, which requires time and energy. And, you know, if you're an owner operator or somebody who's actually in the field doing the work, that's not making you any money, at least short term. Long term, it's a great investment, but short term, it's not actually paying the bills. So your SOP needs to be what we call dynamically generated. I'm just going to write that term down here. So dynamically generated. The term already. So dynamically generated means that as your system is progressing and doing the things it needs to do, your SOPs are being created dynamically. So you don't really have to provide any input because the SOP is being generated or being built with the tasks you're already doing because your system is in place doing the tasks. So an example of this I'll use is if I go back to my first example with my project manager and my salesperson. So my salesperson was dealing with the clients, and obviously the sales process could be 2 years long. So there's a lot of information being passed back and forth as the project was developing. Then once the project was sold and moved to the project manager needed to know the information from the salesperson. So the system of information flow that we had was already built within this ecosystem. So the salesperson didn't have to do anything different. All they had to do was essentially put their emails into a folder, and that folder was basically extracted from, and all the information was disseminated to the correct people. If you want to know more about how that works, you can look at our first video. Basically, the project manager now is responsible for the project. And so the project manager is doing the things they need to do. So the project manager is implementing the requirements of the project. Their team members or installers or technicians or whoever are carrying out the tasks that need to be carried out in order to move the project over the finish line. And so if the system is well built, all of that information, the Teams channel, the Slack messages, the emails, everything to do with the project is automatically being captured and fed back into a system that creates SOPs. So you have your technician who's on a job, doing the job, they fill out their timesheet, put in the notes what they did, it's captured, it's then automatically assigned to that particular project record that was created during the project intake phase. And then everything that they've done is just a running log of all the work done on that project. So then down the road, 10 years, when you say, hey, we need to install XYZ, your system goes, hey, well, you installed this particular thing in this project 10 years ago. Here's all the steps you needed to do it. And you can just adjust and refine as necessary. But you have a rock solid SOP that you didn't really have to do anything for. It just was captured by the task that you're already doing. So hopefully that makes sense. That's sort of kind of the three main challenges that we come across the most when dealing with putting in systems that people actually use. If you go to the link in our description, there is a ton of resources to kind of show you how to get through all of these three challenges yourself. And then also, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We'd love to help. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one.